there was just one a couple days ago about students expecting universities to mishandle complaints. I don't have a bad reputation for speaking up about this issue. I haven't gotten a bad reputation. I got a promotion at my job, actually.
What if you turn hardship into greatness, anger into serenity? Everything changes. Make your life a masterpiece. Welcome, I'm Yannick, your host, and now joining me, Julie Cruse. Julie Cruse is the author of The Burn List, a memoir of abuse from home to higher education, published by Atmosphere Press in March 17th, 2026, and joins me now. It's such a honor to have you, Miss Cruse, on the show. And really, before we start, let's introduce yourself in simply one powerful sentence.
Hi, I'm Julie Cruse, a survivor, advocate, and chief investigative journalist, I guess you could say, at academicabuse.com. And that's, I guess, I've overshared. One sentence, one powerful sentence.
Thank you so much. So let's dive into it. But first and foremost, describe your context where you grew up in and how it informed ultimately your memoir that you so beautifully wrote in The Burn List.
Oh, thank you for that feedback. And yeah, I grew up in northern Ohio, in a little tourist town that is home to the #1 amusement park in the world. It's called Cedar Point. And my hometown was an interesting place, first of all, because of the park, which has the tallest, fastest roller coasters in the world. And also because it's home to Little Italy. And so there were a lot of Italians, a lot of Catholics, a lot of tourists. So lots of diversity in this tiny little town. Also, this tiny little town was, its claim is that it's one of the #1 stops on the Underground Railroad. So there were lots of, historical sites and tours and all that sort of thing. So really, it's an interesting city that I grew up in. And what sets the trajectory for the entirety of my life experience and also the book is that a horrific event took place on Easter Sunday, 1984. And that event was that a serial predator got into our house and assaulted my mother in front of us children for roughly 10 hours straight, and then continued to stalk and repeat the behavior for years. So we grew up on the run. And my mom was pretty damaged because of the number of blows to the head she suffered. And she developed schizophrenia and a number of other mental health issues that led to further neglect and abuse in the home for us children, whether it was from other men that she was, allowing into the home or from her directly. So I think it's important to understand that the environment that I grew up in was just one of gender-based violence from the very beginning, in the home, and that really set the trajectory for the rest of my life, just completely irreversibly. There was nothing to be done to undo what happened that night and how it followed us for the rest of our lives. And I thought that, prior to turning 18, I drank the Kool-Aid that is so often fed to us as children. You go to college, you get a degree, you avoid a dead-end job, and, you can overcome anything. And what I found when I got to higher ed was something that took me well over a decade to completely come to terms with, which was that it was an environment where gender-based abuse was very prominent as well. And it was something that I endured, and it was something that my classmates endured. And I would say it wasn't limited to gendered abuse. It was also racialized and classist. So there were a lot of different things that I saw and experienced that I didn't really understand at first. Like I felt it. I knew it was happening. We all knew it was happening, but we didn't really have a language for it. And so the burn list is really my effort at really cataloging everything that happened from childhood through into higher education and drawing out the parallel of how the domestic violence I experienced growing up permeated into higher education, in that it was already there in higher ed. And also, my experience made me uniquely susceptible to it as an at-risk first-gen student. And also somebody who had endured so much trauma and abuse coming into the environment that I didn't even recognize that what was happening to me was abuse until so much later. And that included like sexual misconduct, sexual assault, blackmail, plagiarism, threats, coercive control. There were so many things that were happening that I felt like they were wrong. But because of how I grew up, if it wasn't like a 2x4 to the back of the head, I didn't see it. I didn't register it as, oh, well, this is wrong, So this book not only is my effort to come to terms with those things on a personal level, but it's also a warning to readers, readers who are either like me or, like have endured it as well inside higher ed, or are college bound and have, concerned family members. It's my effort to tell them this is what it looks like. This is what it feels like when you're inside it. And you don't know what the words are for it yet. So I want them to, see my story and be able to learn from it so that they can recognize it when they see it or experience it, which they more than likely will. And also learn some strategies for how to overcome it, how to survive it, how to get around it. And then also I would say that for educators or faculty members, decision makers, leaders in higher ed, I do hope that they read the burn list and take some cues from it about what they should change, how they should change it, to take into account that that there are victims inside the ivory tower that don't know that they're victims and might be getting retaliated against or, just not noticed by their professors and in some way what they're experiencing or what they're enduring, that they may need help being noticed and having pathways to go forward and bring the abuses to the university's attention. So yeah, there's a lot of different agendas in the book, I would say. But just answering your question, where I grew up and how it influenced the book, it absolutely is 100% part of it. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I also noticed it's very obviously it's really part of who you are, and it really comes through. It's still to some extent emotional when you're talking about it, and so it really it makes sense. So it's very powerful. Explain a little bit, walk us to the moment where you felt like, you know what, I gotta write this very book.
I love that question. Thank you. That's an interesting story. So yeah, there's always the stories that are not in the story. This is one of those. I resigned from another hostile workplace, a higher education environment, in late 2023. And after I resigned, I got besieged with 3 different strains of COVID, pneumonia, and strep throat all at once. And I can probably attribute that to the stress, like my immune system was really weakened by then. And I was pretty much couch-ridden for about 3 months. And that was a time when, I had just kind of closed this chapter of trying to be a part of higher education for 23 years. And so being laid up like that, a lot of memories and thoughts were playing through my head, and I was just kind of trying to come to terms with it all. So when I finally got moving again, I was at a point where there was no talking about it anymore. I didn't want to talk about it to my sister or my friend or whatever. There was nothing left to say. It was just so brutal. Like there was no point in talking about it. That wasn't going to do anything. So I just was like, well, Julie, start writing. And I had no vision for a book when I sat down and started writing. Not a single plan for it, not a single thought of it. I just, I remembered learning a technique in an improv workshop that I'd taken, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, something like that. Excuse me. And the instructor had us pair off and take turns telling short stories, like 3-minute stories. And we did it a few different ways. And the last one that we did was, okay, now this time, tell the story to your partner and imagine that they're hanging on your every word, that they just want to hear every detail you have to say, that they don't care how long you take. They don't care how much you share because they just want to hear it all. And I remembered that and thought, wow, that was really profound. That's a completely different way of storytelling than I'd ever heard of before or tried before. And it really stuck with me. So when I opened my laptop, I was just like, well, I'm going to imagine that I'm going to tell my entire life story to somebody who is dying to hear every word that I have to say. And so that was my only goal when I started writing, was just to try to see what that would feel like, to tell my story that way. And so I wrote for my imaginary reader of one for literally 6 weeks. And in the 6 weeks, I wrote over 180,000 words. I would be up till 4 a.m. I'd sleep for a couple hours. I'd get up. I'd write again. And I'd have to say here too, this was really the first time in my life when I didn't have to work. So I had the freedom to do that, and I just really luxuriated in it. It was a lot of fun, and it was also very emotional. But yeah, so my partner was like, Julie, if you get to 30 pages, you probably have a book on your hand. And I was like, yeah, I don't know about that. We'll see. And so I ended up writing 180,000 words. And the interesting thing about the writing process was that I actually was able to recover blocked memories through the process of writing, like having to think, where was that? When was that? Who was there? What did they say? What did they do? And it's so powerful to write in that way and find out what you've hidden from yourself. So that was really healing. And after the 180,000 words, I could have kept going. I could have probably easily written another 3 times that. I had so much to say. But at that point, I had so many different directions that I could go in that I knew I needed to pick one. And so as I was rereading what I wrote, it was very clear that the thread line tying everything together was that the abuse that I had endured in the home followed me into higher education. And as soon as I recognized that, I was like, okay, this is a matter of public concern. This is the book that I'm going to try to write. And that was when I sat down and just started trying to see, what that would be like to flesh out those parts of the story, organize them in that way. And all the other writing that I did, I have saved. It's all on a hard drive somewhere. But this is the story that persisted. And then, of course, I shopped it over to Atmosphere Press. I tried shopping it around to different publishing houses and literary agents. And it was interesting because most of them had the same kind of excuse, like, oh, higher ed, I don't want to touch that. I don't want to go near that. I have a career to think about. And I'm like, that's great. Way to be about social justice, But Atmosphere didn't hesitate at all. They get like 1,500 submissions a month, and they accepted mine pretty quickly. So I was really, flattered and honored that they did, and so happy to have a champion behind a work like this that's exposing such a big systemic problem in higher ed that most people either don't know about, don't want to know about, or don't talk about, or don't want to talk about. So, yeah.
Just to go a little bit back and explain a little bit, because that's also very powerful, why you actually choose higher education as a career, and especially came already down in your book when you were younger, right? A path out. So give us a taste on why you decided, specifically when you were younger, to potentially envision a career in higher ed.
Actually, yeah. So when I was younger and I wanted to go to college, the only thing I was thinking about was being independent, financially independent, because I watched my mother like cycle through dependency on all these abusive men. And I knew right away, like, I'm not going to let that happen to me. So, I knew that I wanted to be financially independent and professionally independent, and that I wanted to never get stuck under an abuser's thumb. That was kind of my only thought process. Like, I'm going to escape. And higher ed is the way that you do that. So then I got to higher ed, and originally I was a geophysics major. I, envisioned myself being a researcher in higher ed or something like that. And then I changed tracks and decided to go into the arts, specifically dance. And that kind of was a field that really found me. And a lot of people, when they go to college to pursue a fine art degree, including dance, they have all sorts of different career paths in mind. Some of them are going to go audition and be part of a company. Some of them are going to go start a studio. Some of them are going to teach small local studios, and they want those extra credentials. But for me, I knew right away that I wanted to be a dance professor in college. And the reason for that was I wanted to have, a lot of creative freedom. I wanted the stability. I wanted the reliable income. I wanted the prospect of tenure. And that makes a lot of sense. If you've worked through the early chapters of my story, you see how much instability there was, how much homelessness there was, and poverty there was. I just was like, you can be an artist and have stability in higher education. You can do that. And that's what I really wanted. And so I think maybe made the novice mistake of thinking that if I worked really hard, if I, just like I did in high school to get the scholarships that I got to college, like I was like, if I work really hard and impress my professors, this is the surest way, to become a dance professor. And what I ended up finding out, whether it was spelled out to me directly or just through happenstance, circumstantially, is that the professors in the departments definitely knew that I was above my peers in terms of work productivity. And I knew because some of them told me, but I also knew that they, instead of kind of rewarding me for that work, were perceiving me as a threat to their own positions. And so that was a hard lesson to learn, because you can't undo that. You can't unbreak the billiard balls. Like, once it's done, it's done. And so the cat was out of the bag that I was extraordinarily innovative, super creative, definitely a hard worker. And the cat was so much out of the bag that was true, that I started getting external recognition. Like, while my department would kind of stuff me down and refuse to give me scholarships and even refuse to allow me to present or showcase my work with other students, they would use my work, specifically mine and only mine, to market their program to future students and auditionees. They would put me up there on the podium to speak about the program. So they wanted to use the best work, which was my work, to advertise their program. But they never wanted to give me opportunities to advance myself because of my work. And then I started getting awards and recognitions from like Ohio Arts Council, the College of Fine Arts. My work was being screened at like Sarah Lawrence and Middlebury College and NYU, and basically all the other people outside of my department were recognizing my work. But my home department faculty were trying to bury me, and it was pretty obvious. So lucky for me, that didn't work there. But one of the professors there who had a pretty serious axe to grind over work of mine that he had tried to steal began a campaign of slander that followed me into graduate school. And I'm going to stop there because I'm giving away too much of my book, so I'll slow down there.
Of course, I mean, obviously we want people to buy the book, and it really takes so much courage also what you're doing, because it's not something that you do lightly. So how much courage did it take you to actually come forward and actually write it? Because there's so many people obviously that are affected by this in one way or another.
Oh boy. Well, it's interesting because in my memoir, I do tell the story of what it took to get to the point of writing it. And there was a point, maybe you could call it the tipping point, when I stopped being scared and I started being angry. And I think I was scared all the way up until about 2019. So for 19 years, I was scared. And that fear manifested in different ways, whether it was choosing to be silent about different types of abuses or trying informal chains of reporting about it and getting nowhere and then being scared of that, or being asked to be a witness in a complaint and being scared of that. And then there were so many different manifestations of how the fear kind of dictated my journey in higher education. And I think the reason behind that was that, one, I had seen early on that the squeaky wheel gets greased. And two, I kept hoping that once I got to the next university or college, the bad actors wouldn't be there anymore and I would be safe. Like, okay, well, undergrad sucked, maybe grad school will be better. Grad school should be so much better. This time they asked me to come. This time they're giving me a full scholarship and TA-ship. It has to be better. Nope. And then I was like, okay, so maybe the PhD program will be better. They've said that I'm like the best programmer they've ever met. So hopefully, that'll be better. No. And then and then I'm like, okay, so maybe when I'm employed in higher ed, it'll be better, And I'd say that in the last university that I worked in, that was where I just lost all hope of it ever being better anywhere. And once I had that realization, I just was like, okay, that's it. I'm not scared anymore. If this is the fight that they want, I'm going to give it to them, and I'm going to fight, and I'm going to speak. And I'm going to say what I have to say until it's heard. And so I started speaking there, filing formal complaints there, started kind of amassing allies there. And some of them came to me. Sometimes I came to them. Most of the time they came to me because they actually knew I was someone that they could trust. And because they were concerned about me. Like they saw what was happening to me and they wanted to help. So then I lawyered up and filed the EEOC complaint, and the rest is kind of history there. And in the aftermath, I couldn't put it away. There was never going to be an amount of money or an outcome that was settled. There was never going to be anything that was going to be big enough to deal with the lifetime of abuse I'd endured by that point, particularly in higher education. So if it's going to be that way, you can't bandage a cannonball wound with a Band-Aid. And so that's when I decided really to go as public as I possibly could. And there were so many considerations there in terms of, what are the liabilities? I had like literary legal review on my work and developmental editing review. I went through a lot to protect myself, even so far as transferring the copyright of my book to an LLC, so that if somebody wanted to press, any kind of legal charges against the book, they'd have to go to the LLC to do it, not me. There were a lot of securities that I had to put in place to feel safe speaking out. But at this point, it's no longer like, I want to say this. Every step that I took speaking out, like every little step, every little piece of progress that I gained, whether it was I sent a chapter to a friend of mine in secret. Anytime I did that and nothing bad happened to me, I got a little bit braver. Like I was really scared of these terrible bad actors that had like stalked me and threatened me and my family that were inside higher ed. And so, the more I got away with speaking out, the bolder I got. And so that's been a really satisfying part of my journey to kind of get that back after all these years.
Why do you think higher ed can be such a vicious place? To what do you attribute this?
I have a lot of thoughts on that. Well, I think first and foremost, it's that higher ed, we have to remember, was designed by wealthy white men for wealthy white men. And so that's its foundation. We didn't start letting, at least in the United States, we didn't start letting people of color in and women until much, much later. And so there are still the gatekeepers, right, in higher education are predominantly white men. And we can see that. We can look around and see that. You just go to campus and go to those offices. They're going to be predominantly white men. That's pretty apparent. And so are the professors. So there's that aspect in terms of the origins of higher ed. Then there's the aspect of dependency that is created within the power hierarchies of higher ed. So it is a very, very tightly controlled environment to where every faculty member has to go through this path in order to have job stability. So first they're, maybe an assistant professor, and so then they're considered junior faculty, right? They have to kind of earn the approval of their colleagues and get approved to become an associate professor. And then on up to tenured professor, full professor, and all of those things. To move up the ranks, they are dependent upon the approval of their colleagues. They're dependent upon their relationships with their departments and the higher ups. One thing that they're not so dependent upon is the approval of the students. That's usually not nearly as important. And that's also built into how tenure is evaluated. So teaching is student evaluations. They're a smaller percentage of the tenure evaluation process than research and service, for example. So teaching isn't actually that important compared to the other pieces that they're responsible for. So then you throw students in the mix, and students are so incredibly dependent upon advisor and faculty approval. So they need letters of recommendation when they graduate. They need the degree, and then they need a letter of recommendation. Those two things are kind of like what I like to call the ivory leash. It's like the leash that kind of keeps people in control. It keeps people subordinate. It keeps people accepting abuses and not inclined to report when they experience them, right? Because you don't want to make an enemy out of somebody. And if you are a bad acting faculty member, if you're somebody that's a predator and has bad intentions, then it's going to be so much easier for you to walk up to a student, especially one who is at risk or marginalized or, just kind of divergent from the rest of the group, right? Maybe they're just kind of always on the margins. They're just never really fully meshing with everyone. It's going to be easier for you to go and exploit that student, because how likely is anyone going to be to believe them when they speak out, right? And even if people do believe them, are they going to speak out? Because they need you. They need your letter of recommendation. They need you for the grade. They need you for the degree. So there is this dependency that keeps people silent, even when people witness abuses that are transpiring. And how do I know this? I know this because I've lived this. I know this because I've witnessed it, and people have told me their stories and why they choose to maintain silence. I also know this from mandatory reporters who should have reported things that they saw and said, no, I'm not going to do that because they'll retaliate against me. So, so there's this whole matrix of dependency that is so dangerous, and I think really deeply needs to be rethought. And then also there's this whole financial piece of it, which is like, so a lot of times students are borrowing to be there. So they're in student loan debt, which itself is another kind of force of control, right? So like if you've borrowed $30,000 a year to go to this program, it's a 4-year program. You've got $30,000 plus interest now after you found out you didn't like the program or whatever. Are you going to throw that $30,000 away to try to transfer? Or are you going to try to stay so you can make that worthwhile to get your degree, right? So they become debt hostages, student loan debt hostages, and they're kind of stuck moving through the program no matter what's happened, good or bad, you know. Let's see. Also, I think a major part of why things go sideways in higher ed is because they are tasked with policing themselves when these complaints occur. So there's no external third party, institution that doesn't have the conflicts of interest that the university itself does. So you can file a complaint to HR, but ultimately the complaint process is going to involve an internal review. It's going to involve a hearing panel that are faculty at the university. And when these people are evaluating a complaint, they all have their own conflict of interest. They all have relationships that they have to protect for their own safety. The university wants to protect its reputation and its bottom line. And because, I run the data dashboard at academicabuse.com. So for people who are listening at home, that's a tool that tracks global news stories of allegations of misconduct. And I get stories in there all the time about how students, there was just one a couple days ago about students expecting universities to mishandle complaints about, gross failures of universities to handle complaints, deliberate indifference toward complaints, HR representatives speaking out about how they were coached to make complaints go away. There's a lot that's going on because universities are being essentially permitted to police themselves. I think that's a huge problem, and I think that needs to change.
Yeah, you're doing outstanding work. I think this is so important. So academicabuse.com really extends the work of really your book, and you really give a survivor-led platform, basically. It is really. So that is a really, really special. And kudos to you, the courage that it took. I can't even imagine. What do you think is it that you were able to turn this hardship into somehow an opportunity? Because there is also people who actually will break, and won't be able to actually make a difference as you do. What was it in your childhood, in whatever you think it was, that you were able to kind of change the course of your destiny? Because really everything showed that you were really destined to be, to some extent, a victim.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I agree with that. I mean, I could get into my spiritual beliefs, which are not religious, but I kind of, I think in a way, I'm still a scientist at heart. And I can look back at my life trajectory and see the calculus. And I'm just like, yeah, this was going to happen. This was going to happen. This was going to happen. These are all unavoidable things. They were bound to happen. So if that's the case, why? You know what I mean? I look back and I'm like, so why? What was the point of it all? And I think that is one piece of my kind of underlying perspective on the world that enables me to kind of take charge of bad experiences and try to transform them into something else. But the other piece of this is that I'd say two things. When I resigned from the last university and I got really sick, it really forced me to think about my life and the value of it. And at that point in time, by the way, I also have severe chronic PTSD and some other, collect them all, mental health diagnoses, mostly depression and anxiety related. And at that point in time, coming out of that hostile university, I was in a lot of pain. Like a lot. So like emotionally. And it got to a point where my doctors were concerned that I was passively suicidal. And I just stopped seeking medical treatment for everything that was going on. I was like, I'm not doing it anymore. Treatment fatigue, I don't care. Hopefully I'll get hit by a bus. And I'm being completely honest with you. Like, it was just like, whatever, if I just get taken out, it'll be a relief, was where I was at. And that's when it just kind of occurred to me, well, Julie, if it's going to be that way anyway, you know, why don't you just, pardon my French, fuck it all up? If it's going to be that way, if you're going to be in this much pain that you would rather die than continue living, then why don't you just live completely fearlessly? You know, if the fear and the anxiety and the trauma were the thing that was making me feel this way, then what would it be like if I just roared through life instead of being afraid? And like I said, I just kind of took baby steps and got a little bit more courage every time. And I think also like seeing the response of people to what I was trying to do. It was clear that there was a need for it. It was clear that I wasn't alone. And the data dashboard I'm talking about at academicabuse.com, that was so helpful. Because I looked at that and I was like, oh my God, I'm getting like 100, 200 stories a day. This isn't something that just happened to me. I'm not unique. The only thing that we're missing is someone to paint the whole picture and tell the whole story. And I mean, I have the guts to do it. You know, I'm the one that, I have a saying and it goes, you can't kill roadkill. That's like my saying. Like I've been roadkill so many times before. I just keep peeling myself up off the pavement and walking away. I'm this little flat cardboard Julie kind of walking around. But it's true, you can't kill roadkill. And like, so I'm like, all these people, all these bad actors that kept exploiting me and abusing me and terrorizing me, frankly. Look what good it did you. You know what I mean? I'm like, it didn't do to me what you think it did to me. All it did was empower me. Because at some point, and this is what I say in the beginning of my book, you know, to people, I'm like, for those who are currently caught in what scholar Anne J. Lane calls academia's dirty little secret, learn to see yourselves as investigative journalists. And what I mean by that is exactly what I did, gather evidence. That doesn't mean that you're going to use it right now, today, or next year, or next decade, but keep it. Because all these things that these people are doing to try to hurt you, you take every incoming weapon and turn it into a target. So like now, instead of me being the victim in somebody else's story, doing everything that I'm doing, what do you think those bad actors are thinking? If they're out there and they know me and they know what they did to me and they know that I know, if I were them, I would be scared of me right now. And I bet you they are. So I don't have anything to be scared of anymore. And if that's one thing that I can say to people who are out there, like, take a page out of my book. Part of the reason that I did this was to model it, to show other people there is a way to tell your story safely. There is a way to speak out and find justice outside of the justice system, right? There's not necessarily going to be the outcome that you think in higher ed. Yeah. So you got to find your own way. And I'm going to keep fighting for that. And I hope that other people start fighting for that. I hope that other people join me in fighting for that. Like, it's not, one of the things that I want to say, and I hope people take away from this, is I don't have a bad reputation for speaking up about this issue. I haven't gotten a bad reputation. I got a promotion at my job, actually. I now have the word senior in front of my job title, and that's after I did all of this. So, like, nobody's judging me. Nobody's thinking less of me. Only people are like, yeah, good on you, And I'm like, well, we need other people to do it too. It can't just be me. So like, just know you're not going to get judged. That's not going to happen. Secretly, people envy you, is what I'm finding. They're just like, oh man, I wish I had to do that. And I'm just like, you do. You just have to like realize, people think higher of you when you speak out. The right people.
This is so interesting, and it's also, of course, for people who haven't experienced it, it's really hard to actually make sense and to think of how it could actually look like. So if someone might face it but doesn't really know if this is actually abuse or not, what are some of the pointers?
Well, it really depends on the type of abuse. There are so many that can happen in higher ed. But I want to start with sexual misconduct. Because that one is the one that I still have nightmares about, right? Like my childhood abuse was about as graphically violent as it comes, but that's not what I have nightmares about. What I have nightmares about is sexual misconduct in higher ed. That's what really traumatized me, I would say. So I want to start with that. So I'm going to say this. Grooming is something most people don't really hear about. And it's such a subtle form of manipulation, and it's so effective. But so there's a woman who wrote this book called Studies in Lechery. Her name's Louise Phoenix. And she did some research into awe-inspiring positions. And professors are in awe-inspiring positions, right? So when you're a student, you look up to them, right? You're like, yeah, look at these professors. They got it all figured out, right? They know everything or something like that. But because they're in an awe-inspiring position, it's easy to be susceptible to them praising you, right? To them singling you out and paying special attention to you, because it feels good when someone who's in an awe-inspiring position is singling you out and paying special attention to you. That's kind of how that goes. I want to say this: if your professor is staring at you inappropriately, that's a red flag. If your professor is making comments to you in passing, and they're not doing it to others, that's a red flag. If they start introducing touch, or being overly friendly with you, like if they're trying to blur the line of, okay, professor-student is the relationship that it should be, right? Professor-student. If they start trying to blur that and make it friendly, and they're being jokey with you, if they are trying to invite you to go to private meetings with them off campus, outside the department, they want you to meet up for coffee at the coffee shop, or they want to take you to dinner and have some sort of conversation over dinner, or they want you to come to their home, or even meeting at the building in your department, but doing so like on a Saturday morning when there's nobody else there. You know, these are things to watch out for. And trust your instinct. You know, if it feels weird, it probably is weird. And I think when we're younger, you know, the 18 to 22 age range is kind of the typical undergraduate age range. That's such a young age. And when somebody who's more, you know, more established than you is normalizing behaviors like this, you can doubt yourself. You can question yourself. You're like, well, they're, you know, nobody else in the department is saying anything about it. It seems, you know, professors are all like, they're drinking with their students, you know, and then it becomes not only things that one person is normalizing by doing. It can be something that the entire department normalizes by looking the other way or participating in it, you know? So if the whole culture of the department is jokey, huggy, drinky, you know, that's an environment ripe for sexual abuse. I'm sorry to say, but I saw it numerous times. And so that would be sexual misconduct. There's other ones that I could get into, but a lot of those, I'm going to say, they're on academicabuse.com. There's resources there on how to recognize bias letters of recommendation, what to do about it, discrimination, what to do about it. And under discrimination is all the different protected classes, so you can read about that. Yeah, so make sure you visit academicabuse.com to get into that more.
Absolutely. And I'm just curious now, as you laid out, you went through a lot. So how do you do now in general?
As a person? Like, how am I?
Yes.
Well, I'm really busy. I'm busy all the time, which is a good thing, but it's also kind of stressful. I think what's interesting about me now is that I love home. I never thought, because I'm such a feminist, you know, and I really was such like a diehard artist in the early days, and, you know, would literally lose a tooth to go and do my production and do it on time, you know. That's not the case anymore. I've learned how to take care of myself. I've learned boundaries, and this, for people listening at home, I include some incredible information in the burn list about recognizing coercive control and recognizing sociopathic manipulation tactics. So you really want to get those. I would really recommend that, because I tell you, reading about those things and studying those things, I am so well protected. It's amazing, because I've seen people try to use similar tactics on me again, and I just recognize them and blow them off immediately. It's really fun. It's really fun and empowering to like be like, yeah, you don't control me. But yeah, so it's I like to stay close to home and hang out with my partner, my cuddly kitties, and I do a lot of work. Once in a while, I let myself off outside to go and play. But I think I'm doing a lot better. Yeah, speaking out is a good look for me. I call it whistleblower chic. I feel really, really strong. Yeah.
Yeah, it is so, and it takes so much courage. I mean, that's really important, really, to know that it really takes a lot to do what you just did. What is the biggest hope for you in general, for especially for the book? What do you wish that it will accomplish?
Wow. I think the biggest wish of what it will accomplish is encouraging people to speak out. Yeah. That it's okay to speak out. I did it. I survived. It's okay. And also I would say that the thing that I want more than anything is for how misconduct allegations are handled in higher ed. Like I would love to sit down with the current sitting president or the Secretary of Education and be like, look, this is the bill that we need to get out there. Right now I'm working on a petition I call it Double Blind Title IX. And the vision for that is in reviewing science articles, research, there's this common method called double blind, right? Which basically means the author's name is stripped and the reviewer's name is stripped. So it's only the science that's being evaluated. And there can be it decreases the likelihood of bias, basically. And I thought, well, that's so interesting that blind review and double blind review has been around for decades in higher education. So they know that bias enters in, right? But they're not protecting the researchers, the professors, the scientists from that bias. Just their work, but not them specifically. And so that's where the idea of double blind Title IX was born, that when a complaint is filed, here's my vision. The complainant is completely anonymous. The accused is anonymous. The institution is anonymous. And the reviewer is anonymous. That way, if you're a bad actor somewhere, you're Dr. Evil at Professor Dark Overlord or something, you can't be like, yo, I know this guy on the review panel for complaints. I can't call him up and be like, by the way, if you ever get any complaints about me, ignore him and I'll pay you this, right? I can't do that. And if I'm a reviewer, I can't see, a complaint about Dr. Evil at Dark Overlord College or whatever and be like, oh yeah, that's my buddy. I'm not gonna have a finding in the complainant's merit. I'm not gonna do that. And also, even if I don't know the person, I can't be like, oh, a complaint from Harvard. I don't want to deal with that, So if we make everything anonymous, right, it removes the bias out of it. And we have the technology to do it. All we need to do is give, the complainant, the accused, the institution, an ID number, right? And then the person who's reviewing it never knows who they are. It's just in the portal. They review the evidence, submit the finding. There's probably witness investigations and stuff like that, right? But anyway, it'd be so much better that way. And so that's my ultimate vision. And boy, if I could accomplish that before I died, it'd be such a huge, epic win. But so selfishly in my back pocket, I also am like, man, it'd be so cool to have a docuseries made inspired by this book. And I could call up all my buddies. Like I'm meeting new authors who are writing amazing books. Like this one sitting here on my desk, it's called On the Wrong Side: How Universities Protect Perpetrators and Betray Survivors of Sexual Violence by Nicole Badera. And right underneath that book is a volume compiled by some 50 different academics called Broken Record: Gendered Abuse in Academia. And so I'm hunting down all these different books that are coming out and the authors, and I'm building a network. And I'm like, dude, I would love to see a docuseries where we all get to speak together, because I think higher ed needs to see us speaking. And I think other survivors out there need to see us speaking. And I think then we can truly mobilize for collective action and collective change.
I have no doubt that this documentary will sometime in the future happen, really. That's wonderful. Last question. Yeah. What makes you truly feel alive?
Ooh. I think taking risks. Yeah, I'm a risk taker at heart. Like I said, growing up, well, here we are bookending it. Growing up in the home to the #1 amusement park in the world, I grew up riding the tallest, fastest, steepest roller coasters on the planet. And also growing up in an environment of extreme domestic violence, like I was raised around risk and fear, So what makes me feel alive is facing my fears and taking risks. I like to do what they call like deep risk things, like paragliding and, like hiking 2,000 feet by myself in the wilderness and stuff like that. Those are my favorite things to do. So high risk. things that involve the outdoors, and cuddling with my kitties and watching a movie and eating popcorn with my boyfriend. That's the other thing. I really like that too. That's nice.
Beautiful. What an end, really. Let's face your fears. I think that's a really powerful message. Julie Cruse, thank you so much for being truly a blessing to myself and really to the world. And I invite everyone really to go to, and we will actually post the link below, and buy a copy of The Burn List, a memoir of abuse from home to higher education, published by Atmosphere Press in March 17th, 2026. Julie Cruse.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
That's why knowledge matters. Make your life a masterpiece. Visit now programs.the-ykm.com.